Late last week, there was a monk debate between Jordan Peterson and Stephen Fry going up against Michael Eric Dyson and Michelle Goldberg. Now, I've already done a video on some of the exchange between Peterson and Dyson, but in this video, I want to focus more on a topic that Peterson brought up, and that's group rights. So let's start with this first clip from Jordan Peterson.
The idea of group rights is extraordinarily problematic because the obverse of the coin of individual rights is individual responsibilities. And you can hold an individual responsible, and an individual can be responsible. And so that's partly why individuals have rights. But groups, how do you hold a group responsible? I mean, the whole idea is it's not a good idea to hold a group responsible. First of all, it flies in the face of the idea of the sort of justice systems that we've laid out in the West that are essentially predicated first on the assumption of individual innocence, but also on the possibility of individual guilt, not group guilt. We saw what happened in the 20th century many, many times when the idea of group guilt was enabled to get a foothold, let's say, in the polity and in the justice system. It was absolutely catastrophic. And so, okay, fine, group rights. Well, how are you going to contend with the alternative to that, the opposite of that? Where's the group responsibility? And how are you going to hold your groups responsible? Well, we don't have to talk about that because we're too concerned with rectifying historical injustices, hypothetical and otherwise. And that's certainly not to say that there weren't any shortage of absolutely catastrophic historical injustices. That's not the point. The point is how you view the situation at the most fundamental level. And group rights are an absolute catastrophe, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'm going to respond to this in three different parts. So the first part here is how Peterson views group rights versus what group rights actually mean. Now, he says, quote, "We're too concerned with rectifying historical injustices, hypothetically speaking, or otherwise," which sounds like a fancy way of saying that slavery shouldn't be a motivating factor to push for group rights. I kind of get what he's saying, but in reality, in what is actually going on, that's not what group rights are doing. So, a group like Black Lives Matter, right? They're pushing for equal rights. Equal rights, not rights just for them, but rights that we should be treated equally, for example, by the justice system, just as equally as white people are. That's what they're pushing for, equality. Equality are not rights that are specific to just those people. It's pushing for an equal society. So the fundamental basis of what Peterson is talking about how groups shouldn't be pushing for their own rights. Well, they're not pushing for their own rights. They're pushing for equality. Now, maybe you'll say, oh, but how about like affirmative action? Well, as the Washington Post reported, who's benefiting from affirmative action? White men. Research from Princeton University sociologists shows that Asian Americans need SAT scores 140 points higher than white students when all other things are equal to get into elite colleges. Asian American applicants are heavily overrepresented among high-achieving students. So the only way we can create balance on our campuses, or so the argument goes, is by limiting their admissions. Ditto for teenage girls, who are outpacing boys in our secondary schools. As several recent studies have confirmed, high school girls study more and, not surprisingly, get better grades than high school boys do. So it's also harder for them to get into elite colleges, which want to maintain a gender balance as well as a racial one. In 2007, U.S. News and World Report found that the college admission rate for girls was 13% lower than that of boys. And in 2014, the Post reported the 64 elite schools, including Brown, Amherst, and Wesleyan, made it harder for girls than for boys to get in. So now men enjoy affirmative action vis-a-vis women. And most of the recipients of this assistance are whites, who also receive an advantage when competing head-to-head with Asians. So, do you want to get rid of affirmative action? Cool. Good luck getting into college, white boy. That's the problem. People don't recognize when they themselves are benefiting from the system. Now, when it comes to issues like criminal justice reform, I don't think the answer is to pass a law that says we should arrest more white people. That's not a solution, unless you're talking about white-collar crime. That's that's a different situation. But when it comes to issues of how do we create a more equal society? I mean, the big thing with Black Lives Matter is that they are trying to open your mind up to what is actually going on, making you recognize how the system is disproportionately affecting marginalized groups. So, like, part of it is dealing with incorrect assumptions. So those two black guys that were arrested at a Starbucks recently for literally doing nothing. They were waiting around for a friend. The police were called on them 2 minutes after them waiting and not ordering anything. How many white people do you think have sat in that Starbucks and just worked on stuff and didn't order anything? People sit in Starbucks for hours, but two black guys sitting in a Starbucks for 2 minutes get the cops called on them and got arrested. And another example, a more severe example, is someone like Philando Castile, who got shot while in his car because he said he had a gun in the car, that it was registered. He just wanted to let the cop know in case the cop found it or saw it. He let him know, and Philando Castile got shot and killed because the cop freaked out because a black guy just told him he had a gun in the car. These are the kinds of things that I talk about when we talk about white privilege, or if you want to call it racial advantage for white people. White people like me, get the benefit of the doubt. Someone like Philando Castile or the two black guys in Starbucks do not get the benefit of the doubt. That's what we are talking about. We're not talking about passing laws to, affect our lives negatively, to arrest more white people or start kicking white people out of Starbucks. No, it's to bring an equal society. Arrest less people, make people aware of their biases going into a situation, make people aware of their built-in assumptions of somebody, and then make them question those assumptions. Now, one of the things that we can push for that isn't simply, exclusive group rights is something like community policing, where it would create an environment that the community and the police are more intertwined. And because of that relationship, the policing results in less discrimination and more awareness of who is in the community and what is going on, and that the community has a responsibility within that police force to check in on the police and ensure that they are doing the best job possible for their community. Now, the next part of my response to Peterson's video here is on the idea that it's not a good idea to hold a group responsible. So the way he frames this is, well, an individual can have rights and they can also be held responsible for doing something wrong. But with a group, sure, you can give a group rights, but you can't hold them responsible, or it's not a good idea to hold them responsible. I agree with all that. But just because a group has now equal rights, or a group is acting as a group, doesn't mean that the individual goes away. So this is where Peterson's brain, I tried to get into his brain to understand what he's saying. He thinks in a really obscure way that somehow when you are labeled as part of a group, that you are now responsible for everything that somebody in that group does, which is just not true. So one of the best examples of this, a recent example of this, is Charlottesville, where a bunch of white nationalists had a march, and one of them drove their car into a group of protesters. Now, were the thousands of white nationalists, were they all arrested for this? No. The one guy in the group was arrested and charged for what he did. So this shows you that a group, acting as a group, when one person in that group does something wrong, that one individual is still held responsible. I don't understand why Peterson doesn't understand this. I don't understand what is so hard to get about this. Now, the third part here that I want to discuss is can group rights go too far? So Peterson seems very afraid of the idea that group rights can go too far, or they have already gone too far. Now, on the right, we have white nationalism, systemic racism, and issues like, white nationalism and systemic racism is resulting in issues like deportations, breaking up families, people that are not violent, don't have criminal records, being deported and cut out of their family and sent to a different country for literally no reason other than they didn't have the proper paperwork for the situation that they are currently in. But this has, in the past, this has also been an issue under Obama, but not to the extent that it has been now. So ICE is really targeting pretty much everybody. It doesn't matter if you have a violent past or not. You are being targeted by ICE and being deported. That is the right going too far. That is white nationalism going too far. Now, on the left, Peterson will say, well, Bill C-16, that criminalizes misgendering people. If you call somebody a man and they're a woman, you might be thrown in jail. Peterson has actually talked about that. Here's the reality to Bill C-16. I'm from Canada. Peterson's assumptions were incorrect. So let me read you some reporting from NowToronto.com. Peterson seems to misunderstand the operation of Bill C-16. In an interview on CBC Radio, for example, he suggests that Bill C-16 could transform misgendering into hate speech, quote, almost immediately. This is false. Bill C-16 cannot be interpreted in a vacuum and absent long-standing jurisprudence on hate speech, nor can charges be laid without approval by the Attorney General. Overall, hate speech provisions apply only for the most vicious of speech, and few acquainted with Canadian law would make the mistake of suggesting such an impact for Bill C-16. His absolutist view that Bill C-16 poses a threat to free speech flies in the face of Canada's well-entrenched approach to human rights. Is he simply misinformed or being malicious? So, Jordan Peterson was just wrong. And if you don't believe me, Bill C-16 came into law almost a year ago, and nobody has been thrown in jail or charged for misgendering somebody. It just wasn't true. Now, if you want to see a great discussion that goes more in depth on that, I watched one last night that was just fantastic, and it's a discussion between ContraPoints and Roaming Millennial. So I'll link to that video below my video if you want to read more about or watch more about that. Now, let me go to Michael Eric Dyson's reaction to Jordan Peterson's position here.
So I obviously and ideally, and I think Michelle Goldberg does too, agree with the emphasis on individuals. What we're saying to you is that we have not been permitted to be individuals. We have not been permitted to exercise our individual autonomy and authority, and the refusal to do so, to recognize me as an individual, means when you roll up on me and I'm a 12-year-old boy in a park and you shoot first, in ways you do to black kids that you don't do to white kids, you are not treating that person as an individual. If we're living in a society where women are subject to aberrant forms of horrid, patriarchal, sexist, and misogynist behavior, you are not acknowledging the centrality of the individuality of women. You are treating them according to a group dynamic. And if we get beyond the ability of people on the right to understand the degree to which they have operated from the basis of benefit from group identity without having said, I'll end by saying this. The great American philosopher Beyonce Knowles said that it has been said that racism is so American that if you challenge racism, you look like you're challenging America. We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
So Michael Eric Dyson makes a fantastic point in this clip. Society already treats people as groups. So if you are black, the criminal justice system treats you differently as a group, as black people, than it does other groups. If you're in the workplace, sexism is a serious issue for women. That is women being treated differently as a group than men. So this idea that these groups are fighting for exclusive, their own version of rights, their own rights, is ridiculous. They're fighting for equality. They want to be treated the same as everybody else. It's not exclusive to just them, and it doesn't just erase their individuality. Again, you can still be an individual while still being part of a group. Jordan Peterson has fans. Those fans are part of a group. Jordan Peterson's fans. That's a group. The alt-right, that's a group. The left, that's a group. Like this, there are groups all over the place, and many of us are part of multiple groups. We don't lose our individual rights or individuality when we are part of a group. All right. I think that's it. So I maybe possibly might do more on this debate. It's funny. This debate was supposed to be about political correctness, and there wasn't much real talk about political correctness, depending on how you view it. So Stephen Fry in the debate was really the only person giving an actual discussion about political correctness. So I may still do a video on that because I think there were some good points that he brought up. But otherwise, yeah, just keep watching the channel and check back to see if I cover this debate again. Hey, if you like this video, hit that subscribe button below and consider throwing me a few bucks on Patreon at patreon.com/therationalnational or therationalnational.com/join.